So my name is Ramona Gonzalez, and I am a circuit court judge in La Crosse, Wisconsin. I was elected in La Crosse in 1995, and I have been reelected ever since. I'm in my 26th year, past the quarter century mark of being a judge. And I'm going to tell you a couple of things about our ground rules. First of all, I'm going to ask Kelly to mute everybody. Okay, so for this first part of the program, we are recorded. And I'm sort of we're going to do a little sort of formalized. You muted me too. So, okay, so now we have everybody muted but me. So, hello again, everyone. So my name is Ramona Gonzalez. I'm a circuit court judge in La Crosse, Wisconsin. I was elected in 1995. I've been a judge ever since. So I'm past my quarter century mark of wearing that black dress where supposedly I now know all the answers, right? Which I really don't, but don't tell anybody. I'm also the funniest woman in the room because I have that black robe, because suddenly when you become a judge, everybody laughs at your jokes. You don't have to laugh at my jokes. The way we're going to set this up tonight is we're going to have a recorded part of this conversation that's starting now. And it's a continuation of the other segments that you've had. As you know, what we're talking about is a state of awareness. And each one of your speakers has talked about a different part of awareness. I'm going to talk a little bit about that from the perspective of the judge and from the perspective of your appearances in court and of what judges across the state and actually across the country expect from wonderful volunteers like you. So I want to start by saying thank you to Kelly and Sue for asking me to do this. My history with CASA goes back to 1995, basically. I had an individual who came to me that introduced me to CASA. We made the beginning step at bringing in a CASA program for La Crosse County. And as happens in many places across the country, there was an agenda with the individual, an agenda that did not meet the mission of CASA. And we began to quickly see that was not the right time. And so we discontinued that program and I waited. And eventually we came to a place in partnership with the YWCA where we were in a better place to address the needs of children without an agenda from any individual. And we have now grown basically an institutional foundation for our CASA, so that it's there to serve the children and meet the goals that were intended, which is to be the voice of the child and the eyes of the judge in these cases. And so we've had a program now for many, many years. And I also served as the president of the National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges, which is a partner with the National CASA. And as a result of that, I got the privilege of serving on the National CASA board. So the first part of this program is sort of a little bit more formal. When we get to the other part, we'll take a short break and then the recording will stop. And then we'll have what you would normally have at a conference, which is an opportunity in the evening to socialize with each other and with the speaker. Because let's be frank, we're all living in this virtual world, and a lot of what happens at conferences isn't necessarily done inside the conference rooms. It's done by casual conversation, and we wanted to make sure that we gave you that opportunity tonight. So stay with me for this part of it, and I do have some questions that some of you have asked, but there'll be some fun at the end.
3 o'clock snack if I'm going to schedule a visit with.
Okay, as you can tell, you have the power to unmute yourselves. So as I'm speaking, you're welcome to unmute yourself and then let me signal to me. And if you have something to add to the conversation, we will go with that. Okay. All right. So why is CASA important, and why am I here tonight? I wish that I could be in the homes of all of my children. I wish that I could have the information, that intimate relationship with each of my children. And if I could, I would, but I can't. And so CASA gives me the opportunity of having individuals such as yourselves who are willing to give us their time, their energy, and their talent to be where I can't be, to do what I can't do, which is to be there for a child, to monitor what's going on, and to assure that child that will be continuity in that child's life, and that you will be able to, the child has a voice. Now, that's not always easy. And it's especially during this COVID time, because we can't do those things that, how many of you have been volunteers pre-COVID, right? Those visits when we could actually hold hands with the kid and take a walk, or have ice cream with the parents outside, or all of those other things that are human connections that we make as human beings and as CASA volunteers that create an environment of trust. Because let's face it, what this is all about is trust. Trust between the child and you, trust between the family and you, and trust between the judge and the volunteer. It's really based on that. And one of the things that I think is really important for us to understand is that that doesn't happen magically, right? It doesn't happen magically. Just because you were a parent or because you were a teacher, and I love volunteers who were both of those, doesn't necessarily mean that you can do the hard work that you've all been trained for. I want you to think back to your training. I want you to just think for a moment if you felt overwhelmed. Anybody want to volunteer? They felt overwhelmed? Oh, Deb is shaking her head. Yes. Deb, you want to tell me about how you felt overwhelmed? You can unmute yourself.
Thank you, Judge. And I think I come to being a CASA advocate as a retired teacher and a parent and a grandparent, but I felt that the information I got during training, which was it was over a number of weeks at night and so forth, it was overwhelming because it was part of an existence that I didn't know anything about. Domestic abuse, drugs, child abuse, everything. So that's what made me feel overwhelmed. It was just that was a way children would live.
And you begin to think, wow, I've got all of these talents, but how do I make that fit into what this mission is to help judges and to help a child? You know, one of the questions that was asked is, what is the greatest value that a CASA advocate can bring to a judge? I really thought a little bit about this question even before Kelly raised it to me, because I'm asked that question all the time by parents and mostly by lawyers, because they'll say to me, Judge, why do we have to have one more person in this case, right? Why do I have to do that? And I think for me, and I hope for you, the value that you bring is one of exactly what we've been talking about for the last few months: awareness. Now, I'm a Coast Guard auxiliarist, and the Coast Guard teaches me that you need to prepare for what you can see, what you can anticipate, and what you cannot see. And that's called situational awareness. Understanding what your surroundings are so that you can react appropriately to avoid any mishap and to improve the situations that you're in. So I see CASA advocates as providing me that avenue to have that situational awareness. In the 20 plus years I've had CASA volunteers, I cannot tell you the number of times when in a CASA report, I found a nugget of that awareness, a red flag that maybe even the CASA volunteer, the CASA advocate didn't recognize or didn't think that that was an important thing to put in the report that I received. But it was a nugget, and it was an opportunity for me to seize the information that I'm receiving from that CASA advocate and to be able to mold what I'm going to do in court to a better way. Let me give you an example. One of the hardest things I have to do is somehow make a human connection to a parent. And quite frankly, if I could spend time with parents, it would be wonderful, right? But I can't. And oftentimes I will find a nugget of information in the advocate's report that gives me an insight into how best to approach a mom or a dad. And I don't even think the advocate is doing that. They don't even realize it. But in just being aware of their circumstances and aware of the challenges and the strengths of a parent and putting those into the report, they're actually helping me to do my job. So when I look at what is the greatest value that I get from a CASA volunteer or a CASA advocate, it's your personal experience. It's your integrity, and it's your intuition, which has been molded and approved by the training that you have received as a CASA advocate. And I think you will agree with me that you are much more capable of reading a family and understanding that family and the process in which they find themselves now that you've been through the training than you were before. Does anybody disagree with that? I'm not seeing any disagreement. So as far as the value, that's the value for me. But I have to do a little bit of an apology to you. I'm not sure what counties you're all serving in, but I will tell you that judges and programs sometimes fail at utilizing you as quickly as you're ready to be utilized. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, sometimes we don't appoint you or assign you to cases as quickly as you would like, or as quickly as you're used to. Or maybe we don't make the correct match, and the first child that you're matched to you don't exactly make that connection. Those are challenges. So Kelly, if a volunteer, if an advocate finds himself in that situation, do you think they have the awareness to come back to the court or come back to the executive director or the person that's doing the assignments and just say, you know, I don't think this fit is for me? Now, is that a radical idea? Has anybody ever done that? I have 3 pages now, so I'm going to go scrolling through my 3 pages to see if anybody volunteers. Oh, so you all just suffered the appointment? Is that what you all do? Okay, well, I'm here to give you permission not to do that. All right? Because you do have to be aware of yourself, and you have to be aware of the family. And if you're not quite feeling that this is good, and I'm not talking about the first moment you walk in the door, although that may be a situation. I'm just saying, be aware of the circumstances that you find yourself in. And if you are not the right fit for this particular child, then don't be afraid to say that. So Kim Churchill wants to tell me that had happened in Rock County. So you want to tell us about that? Because I think it would be beneficial to just get that out there, air that out.
We've had it happen actually a couple times that I can think of. And I would say that to begin with, we do attempt to talk to that advocate and see if there is some way that we can remedy the situation so that we're not introducing yet another person into that child's life and making a change that isn't needed. But if it comes to the point where we just realize that it's not going to happen, then we would reassign them to a different case.
But you know, that's a painful thing, isn't it, Kim?
Yeah.
I mean, it's painful. It's painful for the child because we have somebody else that's coming in and out. It's painful for the advocate. It's painful for everybody. But I need you to, when you're talking about awareness and how you're going to do your job, right? This is not one. You're a volunteer. We need you to be joyful in the work that you do, because that's how volunteers stay engaged. This is not supposed to be a chore. Yes, it's hard work, and yes, it can be demanding, but there's got to be a love of what you do underneath there, so that you stay in the moment with the child, and you stay in the moment with the family, and you stay in the moment with yourselves. I think that that's probably why when I heard that the issue this conference was awareness, that I specifically wanted to talk to you, because it really is about understanding what it is that you want out of this position, because what you give to children and what you give to the court is huge, but it isn't all about sacrifice. Some of the CASA volunteers I have talked to across the country have been doing it for decades, but they do it for decades out of the joy that they get and the value that they bring to each case. So that brings me to the issue of how long do you serve? Jesse, how long do I have my people in La Crosse County serve?
Well, we all hope that a case closes within the 1-year term, guideline that we offer, but we all know that cases don't neatly close in 1 year. Sometimes it's lots of years.
So do we have the winner of the longest going case out there somewhere? Who's going to volunteer to me that they've had okay, so I got Deb handing her hand up. 4 years, Deb? 4 years. Anybody beat 4 years? Let's see. I got to move my we got to talk to Kim Churchill.
Sam's on 12.
Oh my. Okay, let's talk about that. How do you stay fresh after all those years? 8 years from Julia Ribley too. Tell me from those folks who are on in those long-term cases, how do you stay fresh?
Well, I can say in Manitowoc, it was the same advocate the entire, so I'm the director, so I'm not I wasn't the advocate, but it was the same advocate for the entire duration. Went with that kiddo from placement to placement. Yeah, so quite the commitment from our advocate. Very proud of that.
Well, I will tell you that, like I said, I've been on the bench now a quarter century, and I have some kids that are now back as parents, not necessarily in the system, but in other ways. And so one of the, yeah, Kim, you too?
Well, yeah, go ahead and finish, and then I'll say what I
was going to say that one of the things that has taken me from one place to the other is even in my most difficult cases where there have been multiple placements and multiple contacts with the child. These kids will come back to me and say, Judge, you and my CASA were the constants. I don't know what I would have done if I hadn't had my CASA and you. That makes it worthwhile. Kim.
Well, and I think that speaks to about what I was going to say is that, so I'm staff now, but the case that I was on was 9 years, and ended in reunification, but not in a positive way, as that she now is in the juvenile or in the adult criminal system as a 17-year-old. Mm-hmm. Which is about what we expected to happen. But I don't know if it's a positive, but I spent 2 hours on the phone with her today. I'm the one that she's reaching out to get assistance in helping her navigate that system that she's never had to do before, because they've, like, public defenders were always handed to her, or, you know, so I mean, at least in that 9 years, we developed a really good relationship, and she knows that she can still use me for support.
I think it's really difficult, especially in those long cases, to maintain the perspective. You will quickly get burned out in this work if you think that you can magically change a person's life, that you're going to make a difference in every life, and you measure that difference on a success that comes from your own personal background and experience. Now, that's kind of a long, convoluted statement, but I need you to just process this with me. A child may find progress simply by feeling safe. Nothing else. A parent may find success in just being able to get her child to school the majority of the time. But that doesn't necessarily square with what you may see as progress or what you may see as success in your own personal lives. And one of the hardest things to do in this work is to judge other people by the standards that we have for ourselves. Because that is the easiest way to lose that connection and to begin to lose the trust with the individual that you're working with. It's really hard. It's really hard to meet people where they are. And it's really hard to let people fail and then be there to process the failure afterward. How many of us were helicopter moms? Right? I was there. And my adult daughter finally said to me, "Mother, I don't need you to fix this. I just need you to listen." Because I'm a doer. And sometimes it's really hard when you're a doer not to do, right? And sometimes in these really long cases, you can get burned out because you want to be the doer and you want to fix it. And it doesn't always get fixed. It doesn't always get fixed. That leads me to the next question, that question about trauma. Because if you can't fix it, many of these children are suffering from their own relationships that are trauma-filled. And a lot of the family situations that you find yourselves in are traumatic. And how do you process that trauma? Because you can close the door and leave, right? But that doesn't mean you stop thinking about them. So can I have some volunteers who tell me how they deal with putting aside that the vicarious trauma that is, I think, a big problem or a big challenge for advocates? Sandy, do you want to chime in as you're looking at me? See what happens when you sit in the front row?
Why did I get the front row? I think too, you know, I'm going to speak that I think the vicarious trauma part is also something that the CASA staff struggles with too. So that was kind of my only thought as I was agreeing with you.
Yeah, you know, and I think the CASA staff, I don't know how many of you are out there. I think the CASA staff is I think in a worse position, right? Because you've got to deal with the trauma of the family or the child and the trauma of your volunteer, of your advocate, right? So just, and in some ways, it's the same thing that I'm feeling in the courtroom. Yes, I have some vicarious trauma with the individuals who come in front of me, but I'm like once removed from that trauma. But I have different layers of individuals who have so many degrees of separation from the initial trauma, and everybody senses it and feels it a different way. Again, taking care of yourself and being aware of what your parameters are. I think we're going to get to that. Stu's going to deal with that at the other. We'll talk a little bit more about that in the next session. But don't discount the fact that you need time to process, and you need time to deal with the trauma that your kids have. Don't think that you can ignore it. Anybody have spontaneous crying and don't understand why? Anybody? Oh yeah, there's a few of you out there, right? Anybody short with their loved one and not really sure why, because what their loved one did isn't really that big a deal, but it's just that was one more thing on that day that you didn't need? That's trauma. And understanding where that comes from and taking a breath and stepping back, that is very powerful, helpful to you, and helpful to the work that you do. If somebody wants to know legal issues, what can I say and what can I not say? And what's the easy answer to that? Let me hear from a CASA executive director type person. Who wants to tell me? What's the easy answer to what I can say and what I cannot say?
I always say to think about the information as everybody can share information with you, but you have to be really careful with who you share that information with. And so if there's ever a question, ask your case manager or supervisor, because all the information's coming from the parents, the foster parents, the children, the team, but you can't just share all that information with everybody.
Well, let me just ask this question then. How many of you remember your oath? Those of you who are advocates, do you remember your oath? Have I got an executive director that has an oath close by? Anybody? Do you remember what the oath says? I'm gonna look and see whether I got anybody in the second row who wants to get extra credit points. Anybody? Nobody? Okay. Well, I'm gonna paraphrase because I don't have it in front of me. But when I give an oath, when I give the oath to advocates, there's a portion of the oath that says, right, that you will not share the information that you have. So the easy answer to the question is, you are the eyes and ears of the judge, and you can share that information in your report to the court, because that's your job. That's the oath that you've taken. But to then turn that information and give it to somebody else, that's where we get into difficulties. So within the CASA family, your executive director, right, and the court, you can share your information. But once you get out of that, it behooves you to understand that this is a trust. The judge, or any judge that has you in their court, is placing a trust in you that you will take the information that you have been given and use that information to assist the child and family that you're requested to assist, but that you don't use that information in any other way. So one of the hard things that I find about that, oh, I like that, Stacy. I can hear anything, but I can't say anything. I can hear anything, but I can't say anything. I would just modify that to I can't say anything to other individuals outside my CASA family, which is the judge, your report, and the assistance of your supervisor or executive director. Because I want you to think about the idea that you are you have positions of trust. And what happens if you break that trust? What happens if you give information that you shouldn't be giving to your neighbor or to anybody else? How would you feel if your personal information was given someplace else? So those are my guidelines when it comes to what can you say and what you can't say. And what would I like in reports? Oh, exactly, Krista. If you give that information and if that was you, you would feel betrayed and less likely to provide that information or to trust in going forward. When you draft your reports, how many of you are given clear direction from the judge about what it is that your job is? I think this is the biggest failing that judges have. I'm not seeing anybody raise their hand and tell me, oh yeah, judge, my judge tells me everything that I'm supposed to say, yes, everything I'm supposed to put in there. And I'm going to tell you why. Because we don't know, right? That's why you're in the household, because you're the eyes and ears of the court. And so what's in your report, I need you to put yourself in the place of the judge. I'm going to relay back to the judge what I think the judge needs to know about my family. Now, what I think the judge needs to know, does that sound right? Who wants to challenge me on that? Anybody want to challenge the judge? I give you permission to challenge me. I'm going to put in my report what I think the judge, what I believe the judge needs to know.
I challenge that.
All right.
So I'll turn my video off because I'm having dinner, but I challenge and say that we don't always know what the judge needs to know. So it's best to be objective and factual and then let the judge decide themselves.
And there'll be judges who will tell you from the bench, Bryce, tell me what I need to know. And you're like, every time I hear one of my colleagues make those kind of statements, I go, no, that isn't what you want to know, because then you're the filter, right? You're the filter. I want you to tell me, I want you to tell me what is important, not what you think I need to know. And what you think I need to know, I know it's semantics, but Kim, over those 8 years that you spent or 12 years with that long family, were there reports where you held something back and you didn't tell the judge because you didn't think the judge was important to tell the judge, and that later came back to bite you in the butt?
Not that I can think of.
Well, that's good. That's good. Anybody want to volunteer that? Because I have a few examples in mind.
Well, I was going to say there were things that I said along the way that made moms stop working with me.
Ah, okay.
So I feel that sometimes advocates hold things back to preserve that relationship with a parent, even though it might be something that the judge should know.
And in your many years of working with the parent, can you think of a different way that you could address those issues with that parent?
Well, we try to always give them a heads up, so that, say to them, I'm submitting a report next week. I'd really like to talk to you about it. There might be a few things in there that you're disagreeing with or aren't happy that I'm including, but I want to let you know that we are doing it.
I think that once you make the decision that you're going to put it in the report, you're one step too late, right? If something is significant enough for you that you want to put in the report, but you're questioning as to whether or not that's going to interfere with your relationship with a mom, this is where you earn your money, so to speak, right? Because you have to do that cost-benefit analysis of serving the interest of the child and your duties under the court's order versus the relationship that you have with this parent. And that's not an easy thing to do. And MB would say that she never discusses the report with a parent. I think I would take that approach if I were you. You don't necessarily want to talk to the parent about your report, but you want to talk with the parent about the circumstances of the job that you're doing. Because if the conversation is about a report, then that's about that, not about the life that we're living, right? Now, I know that that's a semantic question again, and I keep talking semantics to you, but it's really important. I need you to put yourself in the place of the parent. If you're talking with somebody and you're saying, it's in my report, or I'm going to put in my report, or I got this in my report, right? Or you're having a conversation with a parent that says, last week this happened, you want to talk about that? Or this week this happened, or we don't have this criteria that's in your conditions of reunification that's being met. How do we work with that? So that the conversation is never about the report to the court. The conversation is about the life that they're leading, the life that they're living every day and day in and day out, and the help that you're providing to them as part of the court order. I know that's sort of difficult to get your brain wrapped around, but I would really encourage you to understand that when you're dealing with parents who are traumatized and children who are traumatized, the idea that they're being judged and it's going to go in a report is not a good way to start the conversation in the area of trust. Because the other problem that you have in that situation is some of these parents are manipulative, and then you're giving them an opening to allow the manipulation to begin. So I would just be very cautious about talking about your reports or even mentioning that you have to report to the court. They know that you don't need to say that.
Judge, I feel like I have to add on to that, and that while I really respect that, and I think that gives everybody good things to reflect on, a lot of times if we do talk to a parent about the report, it's really a time to discuss openly the issues and then also talk to them about all of the positive things. And sometimes there can be one area that's of concern, and then you have a lot of really good things you see, but there's still this concern, and it gives you the opportunity to really focus and not have the parent read that report and then focus on the one concern that you might still have. So
Sandy, I agree with you, but can you have that conversation without a report being the focus? This is my point. You could still have that same conversation. I know that it's semantics, but I need you to think about it from the perspective of how to get cooperation and trust. If we're having a conversation about how you're seeing my positives and negatives, that's one thing. But if we begin to say it's in a report, then it's not coming from you. It's suddenly becoming something that is not a connection. It's not a connection. It's not a human connection. It's an animate object. How many of you have been in a court hearing, right? And the parents want to argue about what's in the report, right? They want to argue about what's in the report. I do everything in my power. I do everything in my power not to talk about the report. I talk about the people. I talk about the parent. I use the information in the report to talk about the individuals who are in front of me. But I don't refer to the report because the report makes it sound like that's an inanimate object. And I'm not talking about inanimate objects. I'm talking about real people. So I will take the information that is relayed in those reports, and I will use it and incorporate it in the conversation that I have with the people. And I know that it's a crutch, and you can say you're looking at your notes, right? I don't have any issue with you saying, I have to refer to my notes because I want to make sure this is really important and that we really cover these issues. But there's a difference between, these are my notes for my personal, so that I get this right, versus this is a report. Because the word report adds the word judgment into this conversation. And you can push back. Let me, whoever wants to push back on me on this is absolutely welcome to push back.
But I'd say as a staff person, I know in La Crosse, I can't speak for other counties, but the staff person like sets up those boundaries and that relationship in the first initial visit. So we're the ones who say, you know, the CASA is going to be observing, they're going to be taking notes on their observations, and then we're going to compile that into a report that the judge will see, the attorneys, the social workers, and the parents before a hearing. And so I think I hear what you're saying, Judge, is that the advocates don't have to continually use that word report, because that doesn't establish a good, you know, two-way relationship. It feels very much like it's us and them.
The person in the chat says, I think it's also important to talk to the parents and the barriers that they're keeping them from doing what they need to do, asking them, what do you feel you need that is not being provided? Let them answer without interruption. I feel this empowers them in addition of being given a list of what they need. And precisely, because it is about conversations. And I have seen way too many cases and way too many parents fixate on what you're going to put in your report and completely sort of disconnect from their actions and what has to happen in order for them to comply with the conditions that the court is requesting.
Judge, can I ask a quick question going back to the possibly left something out that the judge should have known?
Sure.
So I'm thinking in two different situations. So both parents get copies of the report. So in terms of situations where it's a domestic violence situation and we're concerned about the domestic violence, by putting that out there, we are potentially putting one or the other of them in harm's way. And similarly, but different, is if the child is the reporter of something and we state that the child is the reporter of something and then the child has retaliation because of that. Any suggestions on how to handle those situations?
Yeah, those again, that's above your pay grade, right? You don't deal with that one on your own. That's a conversation you have with your supervisor or your director, because there are ways to do the reporting, right? There are ways for that to be communicated to the court. If I get that kind of communication and then I think that this qualifies me from doing the case, I can make those determinations. But the safety of the child and the safety of the people involved, that has to be paramount. So if we're talking about a situation in which you really believe that safety is an issue, then that information has to go beyond you. And you can't make that determination not to share that information. That would be taking on more responsibility for the health and well-being of this family than I believe an advocate should do. You can't deal with that one by yourself. You've got to reach out to your supervisor, to talk to, to Sandy, to Church, to Kim, to Jesse. That is where they have to step in and have those conversations, because they can communicate in a general way with the court about how these kinds of cases should be handled, so that there's a protocol in place to address that without limiting the relationship and trust that you have with that family. Now, if the safety situation is such that we have to intervene and you have to say something, then we may have to deal with that, and you may no longer be the advocate that works with that family. But the safety of the individuals involved has to come first. Now, so I just had a chat pop up and I want to make sure I get to that chat. Regarding the previous comment, asking parents, what do you feel you need that is not being provided? Isn't that kind of a conversation beyond the scope of a CASA's role? No, because your role is to monitor that the court's orders are being complied with. And if there is something that is not being provided to your family that needs to be communicated to the court, then I would argue that no, that's an appropriate question. But the thing is, you're not making any promises, right? Because that's the other thing. Don't let yourself be painted into a corner where you're making promises because a parent asks for something and then that parent doesn't get it, right? And then it's like, oh, I told you I needed blah 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 and you didn't get it for me. So be careful about how that conversation is structured. So it's good to ask parents where they're coming from. It's good to ask them what barriers they have, but you can't be making any promises about what you're going to be providing for them. All right, so Kelly, we are about halfway through, and I'm gonna. I think I hit almost all the questions that were submitted previously. Before we move over to the second section, while we're still recording, does anybody else have a question that they wanted to lay out for the court right now? While we advocate for the child, the family and the child's success are tied to the success of, where am I? Are tied to the success of each other. Isn't that true, Dawn? Yeah. There was another individual who says, isn't that part of the reasonable efforts? I think that question goes to the question we just talked about. Again, reasonable efforts to prevent the ongoing removal of the child to the home is the county's job. And if there is something that you believe this family needs that we aren't providing, then I think that's an important piece of information to get from you. But again, in a way that doesn't compromise you by making promises.